Good morning! I'm the Complex Games Apologist, and if you've got a minute, I want to introduce you to a cognitive schema, which is fancy talk for a way of thinking that I think will increase your enjoyment of tabletop role-playing games by at least 42%.
42?
It's a method that I call seeing is believing. This idea begins life with a postulate by Runeslinger that he calls
genre is rule zero.
And I'll let him describe it in his own words.
What you like or what you're enforcing in play, well, that's genre, regardless of what you're actually trying to do, be it fantasy or heroic pulp or swashbuckling. What you are laying down as the mood or experience at your table in terms of how you play, how you role play, how the mechanics work, which mechanics are included, that all creates, at the end of the day, genre.
With Seeing is Believing, we're going to take this idea and we're going to sink it down into the trenches, where you are on the front lines of gaming.
To give you a taste of where we're headed with Seeing is Believing, consider this.
When physicists see an experimental result that they can't fit into their current understanding, they start thinking, well, what did I miss? Or how could these things be working together in a way that allows the balance of our universe to continue to exist? Such is also the case with all the little bits and bobs that you might initially disagree with. When you see something like a spell, an ability, a class, and you either don't see the value in it or you believe it to be too good, consider that if you're seeing it in the rules, it's held in balance somehow. Consider how, in a star, the gas pressure of the molecules against each other is offset by gravity, and that very thin balance allows our sun to burn. And if you're seeing a star burning in the sky, then that necessarily means that the forces are in balance. And such is the case. If you look at a rules system, it is portraying a genre.
In Runeslinger's case, when he coined genre is rule zero, the genre was noir, the game was tech-noir, and the mechanic in question, well, I'll let him describe it in his own words.
These are noir characters. And one element of the game is that characters, as they go on, get battered. But the experience of being beaten down, abused, frustrated, opposed, this ultimately puts the ability to succeed in their hands.
Now, Runeslinger ran into the same kind of incredulity that I mentioned earlier.
The reaction has been, why would I put myself in that situation? That which is making me, stronger mechanically is also making the villain stronger mechanically. So how does this work?
And his reply to that incredulity was this.
But it does work. But it requires trust. Trust not only in the game group, but in the genre.
And this is where we part ways with Runeslinger. We're going to take the idea of trust in genre, and we're going to bring it from the outer space orbit of theorycraft and down to the ground level, to the day-to-day space where you incorporate setting, system, storytelling, and role-playing to assemble the construct of what the game is in your mind, and color how you play and learn the game with more joy and less salt.
Okay, so why have I given this cognitive schema the name that I have? Well, first and foremost, it's because just as we look through the looking glasses of our imagination unto the worlds of our games, the events that take place inside of them, so too do astronomers who look up into the sky believe the observations that they see through their telescope.
Well, we know because we look at things and we see them. That might seem rather simplistic, but it's actually quite profound. All the stuff that's made of atoms is visible. Light bounces off it and we can see it.
And just as telescopes are built on a knowledge of optics, our own faith in our perception of what we see at the game table is built on a knowledge of genre. That knowledge of genre has a number of discrete moving parts.
The cartoon laws of physics. And so, for example, one of them is, if you're running off a cliff, you will not fall until you realize that you're no longer standing on a cliff. And there's a whole page of them.
I'm sure there's got to be a law that if you see a very attractive woman, your eyes pop out of your head, very large, and then go back in.
And so too does our knowledge of the real universe lead us to describe it in terms of its moving parts and the pushes and pulls between them.
The standard model of particle physics is basically the periodic table of known fundamental particles and fields. It underpins everything we know about the subatomic universe.
And in the physical universe, when you don't see enough of something for everything else to continue working the way that you thought it did, you start making hypotheses. And so when we see something like say, Charm Person, which I'll return to later, in the pages of the 5th edition rulebook, and there's something about it that doesn't seem quite good enough.
But it does work.
The other forces of the game world, these 4 forces that I'm talking about, narration, role-playing, the rules themselves, and also the setting and the ambiance of play, they all come together to mean something. So if we see a particle in our game universe called Charm Person, that particle does do things.
But it requires trust. Trust not only in the game group, but in the genre.
Let's consider a case similar to Charm Person from real life. That of the discovery of dark matter. How did it happen? Well, looking into the sky, some certain things were observed. First,
The Milky Way galaxy is spinning so fast that it should be scattering its stars into the void.
and second, the universe used to be orange. And we also look up into the sky and we see a microwave image of the Big Bang.
In order to go from that highly smooth ocean of orange plasma to today's highly structured universe of clusters and galaxies, something had to act with enough gravity to pull stuff together. There's no way there's enough regular matter to do that.
Alright, wait a minute. Didn't I just promise you that I would bring this theory down from outer space and into the practical realm? Alright, so we have 2 observations here. Number 1 and number 2 from the astronomy side. On the Charm Person side, we have our knowledge of genre. We know that high-level magic users like Gandalf the Grey and low-level magic users like Grima Wormtongue, both alike, use some kind of enchantment magic, and I think it's safe to say that at least some of it is that kind of soft, suggestive, I am your best friend kind of magic. And yet, on the other hand, from our expectations of genre, we have a version of the spell that in the rules, some have described in this way.
In this edition, charm spells, they know when you've charmed them, which is the exact... I mean, it makes it useless, unless you want to get punched later. It'd be called Summon Pitchforks and Torches.
And this is the universe of salt that I mentioned earlier. Figuratively speaking, our observation of the game universe through the window of the rules has given us an answer of 42. And their response is 42. And here's where the theory becomes practical. Listen to what scientists did when they started to see a mounting pile of confirmed evidence that there had to be more mass in the universe in order for the structures that we see to be the case.
The idea that so much of the material in the universe must be dark was met with skepticism by astronomers. Everything gives off some kind of light.
And yet, rather than invalidate all the observations that they had and were continuing to accumulate, they quickly set themselves to the task of thinking of what they had missed.
So how does this work? But it does work.
Astronomers were methodical. They listed every single thing they could think of that dark matter could possibly be. Cold gas, dust, dead stars, rogue planets, everything. Even weird subatomic particles that were predicted to exist in quantum mechanics theories, but never seen before. Then they thought of ways they could detect these objects.
For us, those investigations would be experiments in actual play. We might also take a closer look at what it means for the subject to remember that they were bewitched, and whether this is, in fact, such a severe drawback. And this last one has a lot to do with the way that scientists are looking at the problem now. They've come to question their own understanding.
1. Best case scenario. It comes from particles that we've already discovered, just in a form that's very difficult to detect. 2. Not so great. Dark matter is a type of particle that's beyond our current understanding of particle physics. Or 3. Even worse. We're actually not missing any mass. Gravity just behaves differently on the vast scales of galaxies and clusters. So general relativity? Wrong.
So maybe we need to recalibrate our instruments a bit here. Let's take a closer, more careful reading of this spell, and also think about its place in genre. In the 5th edition version of Charm Person, if you read it, it just says that the charm condition is applied. And I'll give you a moment to read it here. And on top of that, then, you have advantage on social skill checks with the target. So perhaps it is that, in genre, it's so important to roleplay how you are an enchanting and convincing person that we've devolved that from the spell and into the universe of actual play. And if you know the 5th edition rulebook, there's not a great deal of hay made of the mechanics of how particular skills work. And that's left to the dungeon master in narration
and the character in role-playing and the choices they make to figure out.
So when we look at the games that we love, and we approach them from this idea that they're a universe unto themselves with several forces, the rules, actual play, and role-playing, to name a few, then we become empowered to do experiments in actual play. When we see things missing, we write adventures that may fill in some of what the value of these missing elements, or may call into balance things like an armor class that is too high, or a certain kind of magic that has grown disproportionately too good. And here's where we finally cross over. From the outer spacey to the practical. We had a particle of genre that wasn't working for us, that wasn't making sense, and we applied this new way of thinking, this cognitive schema, and it took away the salty feelings in our mind, and instead we were left with an imaginative landscape. We were left with experiments to do, playing the game we like, rather than rejecting the game before we play it. And that's also where the joy has come. I hope you enjoyed this little journey, and you've given yourself over to think scientifically in a way that's also fun about the games that you like, as you learn them, and as you try to solve problems as they come up in play. I'm the Complex Games Apologist, and until next time. If you think this video would help you and your friends enjoy the games that you love more, like, subscribe, and share it with whomever you think needs to learn this lesson.
We can't make the universe as we see it unless we put this extra gravity to match the gravity that we see.
I do have a couple of extra corollary ideas regarding this whole theory, which I'm going to put up in a separate video right here. And then also, you remember those guys that were just a little bit miffed? The Nerdarchists? Well, I love them. They bring basement shop talk to life about the rules of the game that we love in a way that, unfortunately, not all of us get to do all the time. At least not anymore. So they're great. I just wanted to use that example of how you can feel salty sometimes, and how to get over it. Another video that I'd like to put up at some point, which I'll just leave another space for a thumbnail for, is a reaction to all the spells that the Nerdarchists were just the least bit salty about, and my own hypotheses and my own ways of making them fun in actual play. I've played a good deal of 5th edition, it's not my cup of tea right now, but let me tell you, I did get comfortable in the GM's chair, and I must say that everything in that system does represent a coherent whole, and there's nothing in it that I would throw out. In fact, I feel like there's not enough.